Welcome. Welcome to Lake Baikal, natural wonder of the world. This is the presentation coming actually from Siberia, and I am Mikhail Rybalko. I am the person who is teaching at Irkutsk State University. I'm happy to see so many people showing up today, and my main goal is to present a little bit of my own world, the world that I belong to, the world where I live, the world that maybe is so far away from many other destinations, from so many countries, so many places. But that's something that I wanted to share with all of you today. So I have been watching for some period of time all these episodes coming from American Center, from Moscow, and they were amazing. Lots of new things, new stories. And that's why I decided to actually add a link to so many videos that you can find something maybe interesting for you. And again, there'll be lots of things that you can learn from that. And I teach at Irkutsk State University, the university that I think has so many different majors, minors, focuses. And this is, by the way, the world that I really enjoy. Enjoy teaching, enjoy working with students, enjoy providing some maybe unusual, non-traditional, like something different in my lectures, in my presentations. And the same goal is today for me to show you something that nobody else has talked about. I don't want to repeat others. I want to give something my own. And I teach at History Department, working with lots of subjects, actually belonging to the world of science. I am an alumnus. I'm the person who studied in the United States. I've been to so many other countries myself. I have so many friends around the world that I stay in touch even in these difficult times. But I'm a member of the US exchange program many years ago when I went to several places in the United States. I visited lots of locations. That's, again, that was my dream to see that world. And I saw that again, my world has lots of, yes, there are lots of pluses and minuses. There are lots of advantages. And I want to say that where I am, I try to be happy. I try to be satisfied with everything I have. Again, that's the place where I think the most magnificent beauty that I'm going to show to you. And again, that might be not really known to many Irkutsk residents. Not so many of us really go to Lake Baikal. I was a volunteer. What you probably would ask me, why do you want to talk about Lake Baikal? I'm not really, in my profession, connected with Lake Baikal. But at the same time, I was a volunteer in the 1990s of an American Baikal Environmental Center. It was actually Russian Environmental Center, but at that time in the 90s, lots of programs were funded by the United States, were provided by the United States, and environmentalists were mainly engaged in organized through several centers here in Irkutsk. So I saw for myself what was done for Lake. There were so many different opportunities, so many different programs that we find in this period of time. And basically, later I came back to the United States, went back and forth, and I got my PhD in political science, which is this is the subject, the main subject that I'm teaching right now. I also teach lots of classes, and that's kind of very much important. That I really try to show scientific point of view, scientific method to the students. But something that we'll see in this presentation is not really that scientific, that science cannot explain. And that's another thing that we will find today in this presentation. The next important thing that we need to know, to understand where basically the city I was born in, that's Irkutsk, the city which is very different from other Siberian cities. Personally, and again, that might be a little bit, I would say, frustrating and awkward for many other Siberian residents, but I personally think Irkutsk is the best Siberian city, the most beautiful in architecture, talking about intellectual different facilities, universities. Again, the city is vibrant. The city is alive. It's really the capital of Eastern Siberia. It's actually the most interesting city to visit in Siberia. And in this case, some locations, some places are very much reminiscent of St. Petersburg, and some locals say that there are lots of things of like typically found in many European cities, like very beautiful historical downtown, lots of very as I would say, splendid mansions and locations. And again, the city is alive, vibrant, even in this time. So the next important thing that Irkutsk is very, very close. It's about 70 kilometers away from the most unique, most unusual, most brilliant lake we find actually in our world. 1/5 of freshwater resources. This is something we take for granted here. This is something, again, very much shocking for lots of the United States, friends of mine, because, well, first of all, we have all this water in our taps, meaning that we can drink this tap water, at least in Irkutsk. That this water is so clean, is so pure, again, in most of locations, not Listvanka and not Baikal, but that's something, again, that is also, I would say, astounding, very much shocking for lots of visitors coming here. 1/5 of freshwater resources of the world is located here in the Lake Baikal that I want to show today. So this is the deepest lake in the world. Yeah, it's a huge, big well that we find, again, with so many interesting features I'm going to describe. And generally, of course, when we go to Lake Baikal, we go to the locations not far from Irkutsk, like Listvanka. Listvanka is very famous for Baikal Limnological Museum. Baikal Limnological Museum really shows that the transformation, the origin of lake, how it developed. It really talks and presents lots of interesting stories. Very often, of course, tourists really come there. They try to see this museum. And why I'm saying this, again, just right now, many museums are opening up. Again, life goes back to Irkutsk. Although, of course, the hard times probably not really over, but we have a very interesting moment when, again, lots of people thinking about Lake Baikal again. So Baikal Limnological Museum really shows us many different artifacts, lots of stories. The most probably interesting story and the most unusual story, number one, was that lake is actually getting bigger. So it's increasing, it's widening. So it's becoming, again, it's growing. So it's becoming bigger and bigger, which is very, very, again, it's 1 centimeter probably every, like each year. Not so like fast, but eventually it would be something very much substantial. So the next thing that we find in this museum, this is a story of many different species. And again, when we really read anything about Lake Baikal, this is the story of endemic species. We talk about Galamanka. Coniferous is a Latin word that many of us probably would not even encounter anywhere. But Galamanka is the main important endemic creature, again, made of fat. The fish can be actually bought, of course, and it's a very famous actually cuisine specialty. But at the same time, it's very, very unusual because it has many, many other unusual, like many fishes. But we don't really have time, of course, to go all over like many different species of Lake Baikal. I just want to mention that this is something that we can see in lake. There are also freshwater seals that we cannot find anywhere in the world because they live in fresh waters, and this is what is called nerpa. Russians very often say that nerpa to be as full as a nerpa or a freshwater seal, which is not really true because these creatures are very, very smart, very intellectual. And again, you don't really normally see them in lake. They are usually, of course, located in this like middle part of Lake Baikal Islands. But from time to time, you can see the head of the seal popping up, of course, in water. So the next important feature of lake and why it's so unusual, this is like a magnet for many friends of mine coming from archaeological departments. Lots of Americans come also here because they know that there are many important features of this land, this territory, because in prehistoric times, there were this very, like pretty much like known ties between Siberia and North America. Bering Strait was not the Bering Strait, it was the Bering Bridge, and mammoths and animals roamed freely, and the people, the first humans, really traveled. So we have even, I think it was yesterday, there was a publication about these very like interesting stories of some remains of the primitive man. That this archaeological discovery sometimes really shows the very big connection between the people who lived here in this land and the first Americans, American Indians, future known as American Indians, American natives, coming from actually this land of Siberia. So this is again something that we need to remember about these human connections in prehistoric times. Another very interesting story that, because I'm going to talk about Lake Baikal main island, which is Alkhon, there is a story about bald eagle, which is, as you know, is a symbol of the United States. But at the same time, bald eagle is a very famous symbol of Alkhon Island. Not so many of them, of course, can be found there, but this is actually the nesting ground. This is a part of this, I would say, habitat for this very famous creature. When we go to Lake Baikal, we always find beautiful like scenery. And now Baikal Park reopens. This is a new fact, which is again maybe too early, but lots of people are eager to travel. And Lake Baikal reopens. At least here in Irkutsk, we hear stories that again it's possible to go. This is again good news for us. But again, I would say that Lake Baikal nature, yes, it's something that we take for granted here. Forests around us, with lots of resources we find in forests, beauty, yes, scenery, many other things, yes, and again, tourists. Again, we like tourists. They're very much important for our land. Lots of people sometimes were worried that there were so many tourists, but in general, again, lots of economies, lots of settlements really thrived, accepting hosting many tourists coming to our area from Moscow, from the United States, from, of course, now it's mainly the main source historically was like for the like 2 or 3 years in the past, Chinese tourists. So now we really have a very different situation. Not so many tourists, of course. But again, the Irkutsk residents, they try to travel, they try to see. And Baikal in winter, this is something that I think lots of friends of mine shared many pictures on Facebook, telling their stories about Lake Baikal in winter. Yeah, that Lake Baikal travel going to this main island of Alkhon, seeing the ice. And again, it's very mesmerizing. I often ask my students whether they saw, for example, Alhorn Island in February. And they said one thing, that it was just maybe 1 out of 50. Okay, students who really traveled to this destination. Not so many Irkutsk citizens, residents I know, they didn't go there in February, which is again a very unusual fact. We live so close. We take it for granted. We think that we'll be there like any time. But again, just this is a rather sometimes even a rare event for Irkutsk residents. I'm not talking about many friends of mine in the European part of the country. Many friends, of course, coming here in summer, they cannot see this beautiful lake in winter. And that's why it's something that I wanted to share with you today. Story of Lake Baikal in winter, some beautiful views of Lake Baikal. It's definitely a paradise for photographers. Lots of photographers come, especially in February, to shores of lake, and they really have all these beautiful views, amazing just scenery in some places. Because again, this is what is very much interesting there. Every day, every minute is different. Like you have different hues, you have different shades, literally different colors, just changing because of the sun, because of the reflection. So you need to spend and maybe even meditate there for some period of time, simply to find a better view of lake. Like even common sites that people usually see, and all of them would be sometimes seen in completely different light. So many shades of blue. Yeah, that's one thing that we probably need to remember about lake, because again, it's sky, winter, ice, and like beautiful clean water. So it creates all these variations of shades of blue, and that's something that we always remember. Okay, when we go to lake. But also ice beauty. It creates lots of sculptures, caves, some monuments. Frequently visited by many tourists before, becoming almost like some masterpieces that you really see nature creates. This is something new actually, even for many Irkutsk residents. We haven't gone to. I used to remember myself being a kid here, traveling to Alhon. It's a wild discovery. It's a wild place, far away, no good connections, no good roads, so very difficult to get there. And now it's becoming very much fashionable, very much accepted. And again, something that you see there, like all these ice sculptures, ice caves. They'll be all with sparkling eyes, colors, crystals, and you can go inside. Chinese, for example, tourists, they like to have sometimes with them their Chinese dress to change for like a specific photo session inside of this case, or like with the background of all this ice beautiful like castles. And sometimes you can really see maybe some faces, some looks. Again, it will change, but it depends a lot on your imagination what you find there. Magnificent, magnificent views that really captured and then taken back and shown again through Facebook, shown in the pictures of some journals. That is one thing, by the way, that many of us think that everybody, especially in the United States, no, everybody knows this lake. But when I talked about this lake, it was extremely rare. One out of 100 in the United States knew about this lake. Those people who watch National Geographic, they knew, of course, about that. These are the people generally who have very high education, who are very much interested in the world. Of course, everybody who comes here, let's say from Middlebury program that I created many, many years here in Irkutsk, a certain branch of Middlebury College. Lots of people coming here to study, for example. These are the people who of course, have better education, have better knowledge. They generally spend a lot of time simply preparing for Russian language. Of course, they know about Lake Baikal. But that is something that sometimes, like my Russian students, my Russian friends think that everybody knows that. Oh, no, it's extremely rare in the United States, simply to explain what this place, what this beauty is. And again, just magnificent views. And the whole lake becomes like a nice ring. It's not all the time, but I think this year was very, very unusual because we literally had lots of I would say very warm days. Even today, it was plus 25. Tomorrow it's going to be plus 27 Celsius. So it's pretty much like in the 80s and 90s in many days here in May, which is again very, very unusual. But it was very warm winter. We didn't really have these classical frosts of minus 40 Fahrenheit, minus 40 minus Fahrenheit and Celsius. They're pretty much the same. So for some reason, this I think here it was Blake really provided the certain ground for becoming a very good ice rink, where you could literally skate. Again, in some segments, mostly, of course, you only have cracks. Sometimes it's very, very difficult. But again, that's something that we sometimes take for granted. Again, we think it's everywhere. But believe me, I travel, of course, lots of destinations in Russia. And I know that water is very different. Taste of water, even the feeling of water that people consume, people drink at home. So I think Moscow friends don't really drink tap water. So constant changes of ice. That's another big important feature of winter period of time. And when I traveled with several, like with, I usually travel, of course, with foreign students. I invite Russian students to travel if they want to, but we traveled many different destinations, and every time we would be surprised that ice moves all the time. It creates like specific fences, like specific gates. And sometimes you cross this territory and then you think you can go back, and then it's impossible to find the way out. It's literally like we can find, remember, like the story of changing stairs of Hogwarts School. And it's pretty much the same story. It's 1 hour. And ice is completely different. Again, it rises up sometimes, and then you can find a way out. So that's sometimes even scary thing you find about Lake Baikal. But again, it's constant movements, constant changes. The next important thing, that's something that I have emphasized before, it's clean water. It's safe to drink, literally in lots of locations. When you really thirsty, you can get a cup or of the boat and really try to taste this water. It's so delicious and it's safe to drink. Not really in Listyanka. Don't repeat it in Baikal. That's probably a little bit problematic areas where we have lots of tourists, lots of also houses and places, but generally all over the lake. And that's another mesmerizing, I think, and very much astounding thing that we need to remember about lake, if, let's say, a person drowns in lake, then a body cannot be really recovered, like found anywhere 1 month later, because again, lots of organisms, they change, they purify, but they also destroy anything that gets inside them, which is again very, very shocking for us. At the same time, it's a constant purification process that is constant. That's natural cycle, something that we forget, that nature tries to heal its wounds. Ice transparency. The Baikal Lake and Baikal ice are very known, prominent for this unbelievable transparency. That when you walk there, sometimes it's remember, it's the deepest lake in the world, so you can clearly sometimes see the bottom, and you see different organisms and lots of sparkles, bubbles, all this beauty that you can see in these different locations. But let's go now to the studies, to the specific story, to the side that normally we don't hear in the news. And something that I talked with lots of friends of mine, lots of very, very, I would say, known travelers in Lake. And big story is that there are so many things that we cannot explain. It's literally, I'm coming from the world of science, and there are lots of things, lots of lights, lots of different features of the lake that we cannot explain in scientific language. It's UFO stories. Yeah, they're very, very common. Lots of stories when people say they clearly saw that. And these are very good friends of mine I trust. I personally didn't see this, but again, pretty much like almost everybody I knew who traveled for a long period of time in lake, different areas, they saw something that they couldn't explain, and it's UFO story. Again, when I lived in Texas, there was not really far from Lubbock where I lived. There was this place called New Mexico. Yeah, it's again there is a small town, Roswell, New Mexico, where remember the UFO 1947 really touched down, and there is a whole museum. But that museum is not really a museum. That museum really collects lots of stories about UFO, and they told the same stories about just alien abductions, lots of different strange and weird stories, but which repeated themselves all over the world. Not really hear anything like that, but people generally have stories of some side, something that they saw the spacecraft moving. Okay, they saw again some like a specific again movements in there, some very unexpected, unexplained balls in there, and lots of other things. And again, that just there is no explanation why it's like that. Okay, lots of people who have a very strong scientific mind, and I know my American friends probably who are watching right now, they'll say, "Oh no, okay, we always can find the reason," and that's a certain thing that we need to understand about the United States. Yes, the most of the Americans, okay, they really have this scientific point of view, okay, that can be explained. There is a reason, of course, we can find for that, and I really trust, and of course, I really respect it. It's a very, very cool thing, but also try to follow this, and it's very difficult. Okay, lots of UFO stories, but that's not only that. Let's go a little bit further. There are lots of unexplained phenomena, and I think Horn Island is the most famous location that we need to just sometimes simply to accept that it's really there. Lots of places. Yes, there are lots of different locations, Lake Baikal, where you have lots of taboos. You cannot go there. Very, very shocking thing. Women cannot go to some locations. Yeah, there are some certain caves, there are some specific bays. There is some taboo for the women to step on this territory because, well, spirits, as Burets explained, they don't like the presence. Okay, especially in this sacred place. But also lots of people and travelers sometimes are warned: don't go there, don't touch it. Okay, there is a consequence for that. And again, just in Lake Baikal, I saw, for example, sometimes very rude, bad driving of some drivers, and they were punished, literally, like without any explanation. Again, everything was fine, of course, with them, but something happened with the vehicle. They would stop. They didn't respect other drivers. There would be crime and punishment story repeated over all the time in Holland stories of many travelers. Again, something unexplained that you cannot really cross the line, you cannot really violate, you cannot really commit a crime. Just simply not really observing all this guidance or some recommendations of locals. And for locals, again, this nature, it's all alive. Yeah, there are lots of spirits. There are lots of different phenomena that really surround us. It's a part of us. It's a part of the Buddha. For many people living in Alhon, of course, it's a shaman, remember, island. It's something that we see there and hear that they take it just like simply it's the main, it's the fact. Yeah, that's something that we need to understand. And that's something I think that lots of tourists don't really explain, don't really want to understand. For them, it's just one day or 2 days, simply going to these locations, taking beautiful pictures, and not really understanding lots of phenomena, really coming, I think, from these prehistoric times, shamanism. Yeah, something that, again, very, very difficult to accept for lots of people right now. And again, next important thing is mesmerizing clouds. It's literally you go there and the clouds can be, I don't know, like taking different forms and shapes. Sometimes you can see something. You can see something that, again, it's clearly the picture, okay, right in the sky. Sometimes you don't see that, but your camera will show that there is something unusual there. And that's something that I will show you just in some moment. For example, imagination. What do you see? There is a certain sky picture in Alhon Island. This is my travel in September 2019. I was accompanied by professors coming from GIMO, from St. Petersburg University. And again, my camera I didn't really see that with my naked eye. I couldn't see anything like that. But then I looked at the photo I made, and I was really much surprised. I could clearly see something that I don't know whether you see this. I don't really have an opportunity to see the chat because your story, your interpretation would be very much interesting for me to see whether you can see any certain animal looking at us from the sky. I might return to that. Just simply what you saw. Okay, that's very interesting. Whether you can see this animal. I don't want to name this animal because again, lots of people say it's like half of the people say, "Oh, clearly this is the animal," but half of them would say, "We don't see anything like that." Yeah, no third eye. Yeah, no this particular vision of anything here. And again, just that depends, of course, a lot on you. But going further, of course, the most probably famous location is Chimanka Rock. Yeah, you first of all, it's stars. You literally have literally thousands of stars in the sky. Because again, in Irkutsk, you don't have the beauty of lake. But here we we have amazing views of night sky, and that is something that again Shamanka Rock is also like it's probably like very very gorgeous view. It's probably the symbol of Lake Baikal. You find it in the commercials, you find it in many different like views of Lake Baikal. There's Shamanka Rock, Shaman Rock, in other words. Also, this very famous symbol of Alhon and Lake Baikal. So, going a little bit further to the spirits of Lake Baikal, for Burats are locals, again, living in Lake Baikal, and Alhon is mainly Burat territory with lots of Burat. Again, people living, of course, in the main settlement. This area is not really that much populated, by the way. And there is a very interesting figure which is put relatively recently. It's called Baikal Spirit. And Baikal Spirit really has it's a view of the tree, but again, it's a very famous sculptor, creator, basically the person working here in Irkutsk in Russia, and I think right now was creating lots of different masterpieces, known, of course, found in Moscow and Irkutsk. But he decided to put this certain tree. When you drive in Alhon, that is something which is very very strange. Okay, the view is definitely surrealistic, something that doesn't belong to this, but it's really like something breathtaking that you find it. And again, Baikal spirits for Burats, they're everywhere. They're all around us, listening to us, okay, communicating with us. And again, shamans are important for them. Going further, like Alhonet's shaman world, and I think there were, as I remember, like some congresses, meetings, conferences of shamans coming from all over the world. I think American Indians came to us, lots of people who were fascinated with the stories of Alhon and also shaman world. They would come to these locations. Let me show you something that I saw again in September 2019. September 2019, Alhon. I traveled to different destinations, different places. And I was so much mesmerized by the sky, so I decided to take pictures. I decided to take pictures of everything I could find, like all the sky around me. And I didn't even notice, of course, I have a blick. I have the sun literally on my camera. But then I had this like yellow spot, which is, okay, yellow spot is the yellow spot. It's a blick, yeah, for scientific reason. And it's going to be something that, well, it's really like normal. Yeah, we need to accept that. But then let me see, like when I tried to enlarge this picture, I was pretty much like shocked what I could see. And this is something that I think, I'm not sure whether your camera can see this, but if you look inside, you can look inside of this blick, you can probably see the face. Again, lots of people don't see that. But then there are like half of the people, they clearly see that. And this face, yeah, you can really see inside of the blick. It's of a Buddha, okay, man. So clearly Asian features. How can I explain this? For Burats, for locals, is the place known. This is, by the way, it's the very, very unusual area of Lake Baikal. And something that I tried to read the book of a friend of mine who is pretty much like having the same, it's like Karnashev professor of Irkutsk State University. He also mentioned several things connected with Lake Baikal. And he says, there are lots of riddles. There are lots of different mysteries. There are lots of, I would say, different enigmas we can find in Lake Baikal. And that's one of this, that we can see literally the connection with the like other worlds. Yeah, some people will say that. If person is religious, they'll say, oh, yes, spirits do exist. Yes, and so this is the place where you can sometimes, why shamans really come there? Because they are in close contact. Some people really looked at me and said, well, it's total nonsense what you really have shown us. We don't believe a word, of course, that it might be the spirit. We don't see any Asian face. We don't see any Buddha face right here on this picture. But I had a very, very interesting story. And this is, again, there was a friend of mine. He was laughing for a long period of time at me, at my story. But then he said, why? Okay, he knows this location. It's to the north of Khuzhir. Okay, very, very unusual place. Also known for some unusual like phenomena. And he said one thing. This is the place where he literally lost his time. He decided to sit down. It was in the morning. He stood up. Just for him, it was like several minutes of his like pastime. And he notices it was already evening. And again, this is something that, again, we literally have so-called time pits, or time, again, just loss of people lost in time. Literally, again, these are the stories that I get from different places. I probably need to start recording that. It's going to be not really that scientific, I know, but again, it's more different riddles that we find about this lake. So, go into many rules of behavior. Oh yes, lots of rules that we need to observe. Okay, and for Buddhists, it's a common practice. It's common, just law. That you need to follow all these rules. And again, just what locals usually advise. Generally, it's something that tourists sometimes like very critical. Western mind, yes, it's not really. There is nothing like that. But then we, of course, need to really see that, okay, we need to trust the locals, what they say sometimes. Okay, lots of different fairy tales, lots of stories, myths, and legends that surround this place. We don't, of course, have a lot of time to really discuss all of that. Going to the last slide of mine for today's presentation, Lake Baikal, it's a well of the planet. Yeah, well of the planet that is so, I would say, generally still intact. Okay. At the same time, I want to say, little do we know about this lake. Sometimes when we go to the limnological museum, we think, well, science knows so many things. We don't really know many things. We really cannot explain lots of phenomena we find there. Lots of things we don't know. Of course, we try to use our mind. We try to increase our knowledge again, but little do we know about this location, about so many different important phenomena of this lake. Again, I want to thank everybody for your attention, and I want to say that I'll be more than happy, of course, to see all of you, all my friends, all the people who are watching probably right now in Moscow, here in Lake Baikal territory. I usually participate in lots of different events of the university when we have lots of guests. Sometimes I'm invited to show some locations, some places, and that's something I think that I have been doing for a long period of time. But again, just lots of American alumni of exchange programs, for example, they want to come to Lake Baikal. That's another very beautiful, unusual place for them to go to see. And again, just I hope that again my presentation was of some interest, of some importance for you, to show again something. And again, I will probably go now to the questions that I got right now on Skype. All right, I'll go to the questions. I'll try to read what whether anybody had any particular questions. All right, so we have question number one. Okay, from Smiley Rain. What do you think about the ecological situation of Lake Baikal? Okay, very good question. I at first I wanted to talk about that, but then I decided that I would not probably really emphasize lots of things because it might be another presentation. Just if you think that I think this is an interesting topic for you, I might maybe focus on that. I generally used to teach classes on environmental history, and Lake Baikal, of course, was main focus. Generally, I'm pretty much like divided. From one side, of course, we don't really have a lot of industries. We clearly have the cleanest lake, again, the water coming through the only river, the Angara River to Irkutsk, and we take it for granted that it's so clean, so pure, like safe to drink. But generally, situation, of course, not the same. There is a new phenomena that we find now on the Buret side, on the eastern side. I'm living on the western side of lake, but on the eastern side, we have a lot of algae. We have lots of problems with this particular seaweed that really affects. It's like literally green water when you get to the Buret side in most locations. Buret bank, this like shore of lake is very different from Irkutsk, because Irkutsk generally, like when the Stanka, it's really going down 1 kilometer down. It's basically the huge big mountains, and you're on the top of that. So the lake has lots of challenges. Talking about Baikalsk, when I was there in the Soviet times, it was literally very, very difficult to breathe. Baikalsk had this paper factory that affected, of course, environment, affected waters around Lake Baikal. Now it's closed, so the government is trying to, of course, to do the best. There are lots of different stories about pipeline being diverted, being changed, moved up far from the lake, and it cost a lot. But again, the government decided to simply implement this plan. So from one side, again, there were lots of attempts, lots of improvements. Tourists, yes. So people sometimes accuse tourists whether they are so basically come in big numbers of destroying. We have so many endemic. Not only we talked about fauna, but also flora. Lots of plants, especially endemic plants found in like on Alhon. At the same time, we depend on tourists a lot. So, and again, just compared, of course, with Moscow and Petersburg, we don't have so many tourists coming to us. So it's not really that big. I would say challenge probably at this point, especially talking about this pandemic. But again, there is a new story that I think came up about maybe 2, 3 years ago about Mongolian plants, and they're really serious about building these dam structures that would block the Selenga rivers and basically create the whole havoc for the rivers getting into Lake Baikal from the Buryat side. And there is nothing I think Russia can do at this point because it's Mongolian right simply to do this. It's not really that bad compared, of course, with lots of places I traveled. The Great Lakes, I think 4 out of 5, don't really have very good water and lots of problems with fish. Okay, so much polluted in the industrial era of the United States. So it's relatively clean in lots of locations. Yeah, there are lots of stories about sometimes garbage disposal. I think lots of settlements and governments are trying to do. Like lots of volunteers come, lots of different projects really run here. So the situation from one side is improving, but again, there are lots of challenges. Yes, especially for the different areas. Lots of people like penetrating this forest. So I think hopefully I have answered this question from Smiley Rain. Okay, question number 2. Okay, and okay, grapefruit orange. Okay, I like the names. Okay, are there any myths associated with Lake Baikal? Oh yes, there are lots of them. I don't really probably have a lot of time to simply talk about all the myths. The most famous one, when usually visitors come to us, it's usually the Buryat myth about the Angara, who is the daughter of Lake Baikal, and she. Loves the Yenisei, the river far away from us in the Krasnoyarsk region, but her father wants her to marry the Irkut River. And then the father doesn't allow her to marry, and the river Gara decides to flee, to run, to escape, okay, to the NSA. And when the father discovers this fact, he throws a very big rock. It's called Shaman rock. You can find this. This is a cheap, actually, a very relatively small piece of rock, but it's a huge, big rock in the water. It's called. You can see that at the estuary. It's at the place between Listvanka and Port Baikal, where the Gara River starts. So that's the location. So, and that's probably the most famous myths. But there are lots of other myths. I haven't really, I think, collected them all. Okay, going to the next question. Okay, question number 3 from Irina. Okay, Arizanava. Okay, what international institutes, organizations work on Baikal issues? Well, number 1, I think it's a limnological institute. It's connected with the limnological museum. Lots of people sometimes coming not really from the lake areas don't understand the word limnological. It's like lake studies. So we have the whole Lake Institute in Irkutsk. Plus we have also geography department, geological different branches. They focus a lot on environmental. Some students of mine, they are environmentalists. So that's Irkutsk State University that really focus on Lake Baikal. We don't really have very like a big number of NGOs now, not like in the 1990s, where simply like not really so much money was available to the science. And now we have, I think, lots of different projects organized by the Baikal Interactive Environmental Center. So there are several organizations that work also with Lake Baikal, trying to provide their help, expertise, lots of other very important projects. I think governments trying to contribute. Yeah, it's now also the federal budget is trying to to provide some help and assistance here. So, but again, just these are the main structures that really affiliated with the Russian government that we find in our area. Okay, going to the next question. Okay, question from Georgia, okay, KGS, okay. I don't know what it means, but what is the temperature there? All right, okay, very, very important question for us. It's today it was plus 25 Celsius. In May, May actually was pretty cool compared with even some days in April. But tomorrow and the weekend would be pretty warm. Okay, it's gonna be again. This is a certain feature of Lake Baikal in Irkutsk. We have extremes. Generally, in the daytime, temperature would be very hot, very warm, plus 30 sometimes. Like in summer, it's pretty common to have plus 30 Celsius. But then temperature goes down at night. So there is a very big extreme variation that we find about this lake. But again, at the same time, lake preserves a lot of cold from spring, from winter. So it's going to be cooler, but at the same time, in the fall, the lake preserves a lot of warmth through the summer. So, and then it's this area is very close to lake. They really have there's the phenomenon which is known as Indian summer. So, relatively warm period of time in September, compared even with the temperatures like to the north of Irkutsk. So Irkutsk is really is very much affected by this water reservoir. Like the only river, the Angara River, has three main hydroelectric stations. That's another feature of our life here in Siberia because hydroelectric stations provide us with actually the cheapest electricity in the world. The price tag we usually pay for electricity, it might be like $5-10 probably maximum. It used to be even like less before, maybe even like $2 or $3 per month. So knowing the prices, of course, for electricity in the United States, of course, that's something unbelievable, incredible. Okay, that's something that we take. But of course, the hydroelectric stations, all these dams, they like you remember in America, they're considered to be too dangerous for environment, and that's why the government is trying to demolish them. So in the United States, we have more different plans to actually bring nature back. There is no story of that, of course, here because so many industries depend on cheapest electricity. Talking about aluminum industry in Chernihiv and Bratsk, we have lots of other different projects and plants, and they are very much connected with cheapest electricity. One of that, of course, is also Irkutsk, the city I live in. Now is considered to be, probably there are also several places we find in the world, but because of the cheapest electricity, it's considered to be the capital of Bitcoin. So that's another very interesting, I would say, status of my city. So going to the next question. Okay, question 6 is from Irina again. I think you should explain about ethnic minorities. Okay, natives who have their beliefs and values. Okay, shamanism. It was their place of living before. Oh yes. So we have again talking about Siberian locals, or Siberian natives. Yes, these are mainly the groups belonging to the Asian race. All of them are pretty much like scattered around. One thing that I think in many American historical books, I found lots of mistakes. In reality, of course, when I studied the United States, I was really much shocked because, again, the comparison was between American Indians and and Siberian natives. Siberian natives actually were much better off. Okay, number one, of course, they didn't really have any problems with all this measles and smallpox, all these epidemics, okay, brought by the Europeans. So they were simply much better off, like in close contact with all these different groups, Eurasian groups traveling from one location to another.
So, and also the land is so big and so vast here, so we have enough space for everybody. So many empty places. Again, when you travel in, let's say, in European part of the country, in Russia and not far from Moscow, you clearly see a very, I would say, high density of population. It's the same story in most of European states. When you go there, you have village immediately, like one day, just like simply you can go like and travel like through vast territories. Here it takes Irkutsk is located 3 days away from Moscow, 3 days away from Beijing, 3 days from Almaty, 3 days from Vladivostok. It's right in the middle of Eurasia, as we sometimes like to say and boast. But I think talking about I think minorities, we generally have several like large groups, okay, who have their homelands, and Buryatia. Buryatia is very close to Irkutsk. It's only 9 hours on the train. Yeah, simply traveling from Irkutsk on the train, and to the north of us, it's to the northeast, it's Yakutia. And Yakutia, it's the place known for frosts, for very, very extreme cold temperatures, and lots of course, Yakuts and I think the Buryats, they generally considered to be the largest ethnic groups. And we have lots of, as we call natives, titular groups. There are like several words used to describe local population and Siberian natives. We have mainly, of course, the Buryats. Although to the north of us, there are the Evenki people who are this like taiga tundra like reindeer farmers, breeders. So generally, these are like smaller groups. Buryats are much more, of course, populous, and we find the Buryats in Horn Island that I talked today, and also on another side of Lake Baikal. So it's going to be this area of Buryatia. Okay, it's eastern shore of Lake Baikal, and to the north of Irkutsk, also there are some areas that used to be the specific district of the Buryats. Buryats are very like the best breeders of, first of all, cows, cattle, generally cattle, and we take for granted that we have their, I would say, best milk in the world, literally because thanks to the Buryats breeding all these cows. Number one thing that again is shocking for lots of American visitors is simply to see the cows roaming freely in villages, going back to the hosts, simply going around just the village, and that's something that we take for granted. But again, it's this is the meat that they give us. It's considered to be organic milk. Organic meat and milk and other products that we find that is extremely expensive in the United States. It's mainly only like for the rich, simply to like you can afford that. You cannot afford it and again we have it relatively, I would say, inexpensive, but at the same time, very, very good quality meat products here in Irkutsk, for example. We take it for granted. So the natives generally, yes, they are really much assimilated in some areas. In other areas, they really can preserve their like nature. When we talk about the Buryats in Irkutsk, most of my Buryat friends they lost language, like Buryat language. They speak Russian. They're sometimes more Russians than the Russians. So that's another big important phenomenon. Of our area. Okay, going to the next question, question number 7 from Victoria. Okay, and what programs you aware that help preserve unique ecosystem of Lake Baikal? Is it true that the lake has an ability to clean itself? Yes, there is an ability. We can find it, of course, in lots of books. Lots of scientists they'll say that, but of course, the impact of the humans can be sometimes much more devastating, and that's I think the problem sometimes, like in some villages, it's dump areas. Lots of people dump things, and it's located not far from lake. Generally, I think the government is trying to create a specific zone where you cannot build. Sometimes some areas. There are pluses and minuses for that. Yeah, so minus it affects the lives of the people who live on lake, especially on Horn Island. At the same time, it provides some at least encouragements, yes, like incentives for the people to simply to pay attention to this fact and to really have more again nature in mind when they build something like tourist houses and tourist areas. The government programs. when we talk about programs, there are so many of them. There are regional programs. They're very much officially declared, of course, and announced. There are also federal programs. Sometimes I lost my count. I teach government policies, and that's a very interesting thing that we often really we are lost in the number of these programs. How effective they are, that's another question. And sometimes it's very hard to calculate whether this program was really effective or not really the combination, not the interactive effects of many other programs participating at the same time. So what has it been done? There was a lot of stories, well, about wasteful management, let's say, of the money funds for the tourist development in Большой Goloustny. That was very, very famous like case where Большой Goloustny go there is not really so much like to see there, which is very, very sad, and not really so much has been built. Okay, and lots of money has been provided, like in the previous years. So it's very, very difficult probably to calculate what is really the best program. Again, we clearly see that the government is trying to do something, of course. And Vladimir Putin came to Lake, so he went, remember, on the specific, this, like we call it deep ocean vehicle, going down there on the bottom, trying to participate in different, like environmental projects generally considered to be a priority. Okay, they are very much emphasized by authorities. So, in many cases, of course, whether it's enough, that's another question. I think it's very hard to, like, for me, again, coming from a scientific world, it's always a question, like, how do we know that? Okay, how do we know what we know? And one thing, again, I want to, as I see probably right now, it's our time, okay, to stop our presentation. I want to say that this is something that I told my students all the time, that the more I study about something, the more I learn about something, the more I understand that I don't understand anything at all about this place. So that is again something that comes to me all the time when I try to explain different phenomena. We really sometimes don't really find lots of words for explanation. All right, I think I don't see any other questions. I think it's our time. Yes, it's 10 o'clock here in Irkutsk time. It's 5 p.m. in Moscow. Again, thank you. I thank everybody for watching my very short presentation about the world I come from. Okay, with my best wishes, goodbye. Goodbye, everybody.